Surge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive. It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. As European leaders meet in Paris, the British Prime Minister recommits to peacekeeping troops in Ukraine and demands US help to ensure a lasting peace in Europe.
The US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
President Zelensky is in the Middle East, but is not expected to see Russian officials there for talks with the US. Also tonight, a plane crashes and flips upside down in Toronto, leaving 15 people injured and 2 in a critical condition. The Vatican says Pope Francis will stay in hospital with an infection, presenting a complex clinical picture. Lisa Smith is named as the victim of a shooting outside a pub on Valentine's Day, as police continue to search for the suspect. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. A once-in-a-generation moment. The Prime Minister has urged Europe tonight to step up and do more, saying he is prepared to commit British troops to Ukraine. Speaking after a meeting of European leaders in Paris today, Sir Keir Starmer said he'll be going to the US next week to secure a US backstop. The United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Saudi Arabia tonight due to hold talks with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The talks to discuss the war in Ukraine have been criticised for not involving Kiev. But today it was announced that President Zelensky will visit Saudi Arabia on Wednesday. Coming up, we'll be in Ukraine to analyse how the British military could assist on the ground. But first, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports from the Élysée Palace in Paris.
The Prime Minister was the first guest to arrive at this meeting, warmly greeted by the French President. Leaders from two nations that have long cherished the transatlantic alliance and both now fear it fraying. More leaders followed from Europe's biggest countries, as well as from NATO and the European Union, a show of unity and of anxiety. Keir Starmer emerged from the meeting in sombre mood, admitting Europe must spend more on defence, but insisting that any peace deal in Ukraine would require American military muscle.
Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement. But there must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
Prime Minister, by unilaterally starting talks with Russia, has the United States undermined the UK, Europe and Ukraine?
What the United States wants is lasting peace. That's what Ukraine wants. That's what the United Kingdom wants. And that's what European allies want.
European leaders gathered here purely because of the actions, rhetoric and criticism of Donald Trump and his top team. But while they met at the Élysée, the Americans and Russians were in Saudi Arabia, debating the future of Ukraine. The Russian delegation revelling in this sudden diplomatic turnabout, delighted that Europe has been left on the margins.
The
European philosophy hasn't gone anywhere, so I don't know what they should do at the negotiating table. If they're going to weasel out some cunning ideas about freezing the conflict while actually intending, as is their custom, nature and habit, to continue the war, then why should we invite them at all?
But could there really be a peace deal if Ukraine isn't at the table? The country's president has travelled to the Middle East, defiant.
Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as negotiations with no result. And we cannot acknowledge any arrangements about us that were made without us.
Many of these leaders accept they need to invest more money, time and thought into defence. And if the world order is changing, if America is becoming a less reliable ally, then that process will surely accelerate. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paris.
Well, the emergency meeting on the war in Ukraine has once again brought into sharp focus how much NATO countries spend on defence. The UK is set to spend £68.7 billion on defence in the coming year, compared to £214 billion on health and social care and just under £100 billion on education. Defence spending of £68.7 billion is equivalent to 2.33% of GDP, above the 2% NATO target. But the UK is now expected to go further, hitting 2.5% would take the total to £74.6 billion. 3% would cost another £20.7 billion a year, taking the bill to more than £95 billion. The PM has committed to peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, and President Zelensky says any force would require at least 110,000 troops, putting even greater pressure on European countries' defence spending. But there are only 74,000 soldiers in the British Army. A defence source has told Sky News the UK could probably contribute around 5,000 troops for a long-term mission. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, reports now from Lviv in western Ukraine.
The relentless brutality of Russia's war. Here, Ukrainian soldiers on the counter-attack. This is a front line that could become frozen in any ceasefire deal, with foreign forces potentially brought in to keep the peace. British troops like these could be among them. They have expertise in commanding operations, but no longer much capacity.
What is lacking are the teeth,
the sinews of war, the capabilities, the people, and this requires significant numbers of people. For example, if Britain was to sign up to providing some 10,000 troops for this, that would actually mean 30,000.
The last time the UK deployed forces at any kind of scale was to Afghanistan. But keeping 10,000 soldiers on the ground requires another 10,000 to be resting back home and a third 10,000 to be preparing to deploy. Today, Britain would likely struggle to muster a force half that size to help uphold any ceasefire. While Keir Starmer is talking about the possibility of sending British troops here to Ukraine, defence insiders say he needs a reality check. The armed forces have been hollowed out over decades, and sources tell me unless the Prime Minister quickly increases defence spending to a minimum of 2.5% of GDP, which amounts to an extra £5 billion a year, he faces the prospect of new big cuts to the military. Speaking at a security summit in Munich over the weekend, the Ukrainian president signalled any foreign peacekeeping force would need to comprise at least 110,000 troops. A huge undertaking for the UK and its European allies, unless the US also plays a part.
It's a heck of a lot cheaper to prevent a war than to have to fight one. And I think what's more important than the 2.5 or 2.65 debate that I read about going on here in the UK is what kind of force do you want to have? And what you need is a military force that can operate for sufficient duration and an ample scale to prevail in a conflict.
The hope, of course, is that if an international force is sent to Ukraine, it would never have to fight. But the soldiers would need Russia to believe that they could and fight to win. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Well, Adam Parsons joins us now from Paris. Adam, it's only Monday, but quite an extraordinary start to the week already. And we have comments tonight from President Zelensky.
Yeah, in the past couple of minutes, he's put out a statement saying that he's spoken to Emmanuel Macron about the talks in Europe. He says about European leaders, well, we share a common vision. And then he says security guarantees must be robust and reliable. Any other decision, says Zelensky, without such guarantees, such as a fragile ceasefire, would only serve as another deception by Russia and a prelude to a new Russian war against Ukraine or other European nations. Right, let's put the pieces of that together. So Zelensky is effectively saying that he's thinking about how a peace, if it is achieved, can be guaranteed. And he's echoing exactly what Keir Starmer said when I was with him a little earlier, saying that a ceasefire isn't enough because that would be a prelude to another Russian invasion. So Zelensky is rolling in behind that. What did then Keir Starmer go on to say? He said that the US would have to provide this expression, a military backstop. He didn't expand on what that means, but I think we can all guess. A backstop in these terms means using the American military might in order to dissuade Russia from any form of attack. And of course, NATO's articles would also mean that an attack on troops who are stationed in Ukraine trying to prevent the peace will be an attack on one nation, will be an attack on all. With the Americans, we know, will be much worried about that. They do not want to deploy troops. And at the back of all this, tomorrow, Sergei Lavrov, the very experienced Russian foreign minister, will be sitting down opposite Marco Rubio, the newly installed American Secretary of State. In Europe, their focus is on what they'll say about Ukraine, how they might try and strike a peace deal, how they might carve up that country. But I think we have to look at the wider picture. That conversation won't just be about Ukraine. It will be about Russian and American relations. It may be about closer ties on economics, on geopolitics, on diplomacy. And remember, Russia has strong interests in the Middle East. Look what's happened to Syria. The United States, we know Donald Trump wants to buy Gaza. He also wants to buy Greenland. He is a disruptor, and so is Vladimir Putin. Europeans will worry those two leaders have more in common than they might feel comfortable with.
Indeed. Adam, thank you very much for the moment. To some breaking news now, and a Delta Airlines plane has crash-landed at Toronto Pearson Airport. It's reported at least 15 people are injured in the crash, which saw the plane completely flip over. Well, let's speak now to our US correspondent, James Matthews. James, what do we know?
Yeah, hi, Gillian. This flight was coming in from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Pearson International. 80 people were on board, and the pictures speak to a miraculous escape. At some point in the landing process, this aircraft flipped, landing upside down. At least one of its wings sheared off. All those on board were evacuated. There was an open door, apparently through the actual door of the aircraft. In a bizarre scene, some apparently travellers were on the tarmac standing by this fuselage as emergency services doused it down. They were taking pictures of their own escape. In terms of injuries, 15 people are said to have suffered injuries. 2 of them are critical. At least 1 child has been taken to hospital. Clearly, it's early days, but investigators will be looking at weather conditions amongst other things. There was blowing snow in Canada, in that locality at the time. There were winds of up to 65 miles an hour, and dozens of flights, arrivals and departures had been delayed at the same airport. We will know more information in the next couple of hours, Gillian. There's due to be a news conference fairly soon.
OK, James, thank you very much for that. We'll be back to you a bit later on. Doctors are treating Pope Francis in hospital tonight for what has been described by the Vatican as a complex clinical condition. Concerns have been growing about the 88-year-old's health after he was admitted to hospital on Friday. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, reports.
This isn't the first time Pope Francis has contracted bronchitis, but it's certainly the most serious case. The pontiff was admitted to hospital in Rome on Friday, with his doctors releasing new details about his infection. Polymicrobial, they say. There's more than one organism responsible, and their treatment ineffective so far.
Let's hope. We'll be saying an extra prayer. First we said 1 a day, but now we'll say 2.
He was seen in public on a number of occasions last week, looking pale and bloated at this outdoor mass in Vatican City. He said a few words, but they were laboured, before handing his address over to an assistant. This 88-year-old has made few concessions to age, with a grueling schedule that encompasses matters of faith and affairs of state. In recent days, he welcomed the Slovakian Prime Minister, then attacked the American president over planned mass deportations. Doctors say it's all taken its toll.
It's a kind of mix of different risk factors. I mean, from the age, plus the immunosuppression, plus obviously his duties, and at the end altogether exacerbate this infection. But I'm sure that he is still very strong. So he is, as we say in Italy, he has a very good temper.
As the doctors alter his treatment regime, members of the Catholic Church will worry as they wait. And Pope Francis was in parishioners' minds in central London.
I hope the Pope gets better. It's because he's a good guy. He's a Pope.
He's one of the most respected Christians we have in the world this time. So, yeah, we'll keep praying for him.
It seems doctors' orders will supersede holy orders, with the pontiff's medical team prescribing complete rest. The spiritual leader to more than 1 billion may not be seen for a while. John Sparks, Sky News.
Police have named the victim of the shooting outside a pub on Valentine's Day as 43-year-old Lisa Smith. As police continue to search for the suspect, CCTV has emerged, capturing the sound of the gunshots. Sadia Chowdhury reports from Knockholt in Kent.
You're about to hear 3 gunshots. That's the first. A passerby barely notices. There's the second. And the final. By now, it is unmistakable. Police say the victim is Lisa Smith. She was 43 and from Slough in Berkshire. She died at the scene. It happened 50 miles from home at this pub car park.
The landlady here told Sky News what she saw. It was around 7 p.m. and people were just sitting down for their Valentine's Day meals when the shots were fired. Customers started screaming and crying, she said, when they realised what had happened.
Kent police say the suspect, a man, was known to the victim. He's the only one they're looking for. Police found a gun and car linked to him 16 miles away at the Dartford crossing. There are reports that he was seen on the wrong side of a bridge barrier. Police say they haven't ruled out the possibility that he may have jumped into the water. Officers are now focusing on searches to recover him from the river. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News, in Knockholt in Kent.
Israel says it's preparing to receive the bodies of 4 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Israeli security officials said they're working towards bringing home an additional 6 living hostages on Saturday. It comes after the Israeli military said it killed Mohammed Shaheen, Hamas's head of operations, which was later confirmed by the militant group. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says the government has met a key election promise early to deliver an extra 2 million NHS appointments in England. Figures show in the first 5 months of the Labour government, there were almost 2.2 million more appointments compared with the same time in 2023.
Still enormous challenges in the NHS, a hell of a lot more to do on waiting lists, on A&E response times and ambulance response times, on people's ability to get a GP appointment, which aren't covered in today's figures. So I don't pretend there aren't still enormous challenges. I'm not doing victory laps, but I think it's important when people are so cynical about, frankly, politics, politicians, and whether any of us can deliver anything we say, that we are reporting back to the country saying, we said we'd deliver 2 million more appointments in the first year. We've delivered early, a lot done, a hell of a lot more to do.
The 2018 Tour de France winner, Geraint Thomas, has confirmed that he'll be retiring at the end of the season. Over his 19-year career, the British cyclist also claimed 2 Olympic golds and 3 world titles and received an OBE in 2019.
It's been a long career. It's my 19th season as a professional now, and I still really enjoy it. But as I say, I don't want to do one too many, and I still want to perform at the top. And, you know, families, I've got a young son who's getting older now, obviously, and just felt like the right time. So final year, going to enjoy it, and looking forward to the next few months.
To Germany, and the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, and his government face being voted out of office as voters will head to the polls on Sunday in a general election. Instead, Germany's far-right anti-immigration AfD party has seen its popularity rise. Our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, has been looking at why the country is becoming more politically divided.
A battle for power is raging in Germany. For the first time since World War II, a far-right party is expected to come second in a general election. A possibility terrifying opponents.
I've come from a Jewish heritage, so I'm really worried about the safety of my family.
I don't want to believe that 20% of German population is extremist.
The Alternative for Germany, or AfD, denies it's extremist and says it's doing what voters want. But from east to west, thousands have rallied against them, many repelled by their anti-immigration stance.
We look at this country, it's not my Syrian refugees whose fault it is that my wages are short, or that, that it's crime. It's not refugees. That's just like what the AfD always tells us. Migrants, they kill people with knives.
It's just
What are you talking?
What do you think? But suddenly, a man trying to get to the AfD rally interrupts. It's immediately clear how divided voters are, especially around migration.
I agree with the deportation thing, because we have definitely too much foreigners and there's too much violence. I'm worried about that we're heading directly in a situation of civil war.
Do you think it's that bad?
Yeah, but society is so divided into two parties.
The debate around migration's been amplified after an Afghan man admitted deliberately driving into protesters in Munich just a few days before the vote. It's one of a number of alleged attacks carried out by foreigners in the last year.
This is Germans in Frankfurt cheering as Syrians arrive in 2015. So this is some of 1 million people. And you can see there people cheering.
I won't say it's a mistake, but it was ignorance.
A decision by the then Chancellor Angela Merkel to allow around 1 million refugees to enter the country during the 2015 migrant crisis helped fuel support for the AfD. Satish arrived from India in 2008. He says Germany's become unrecognisable in the last decade. The balance is wrong.
Germany is well aware that you have to integrate, you have to bring skills. Yeah? Immigrants should not be a threat to your country. There you have to draw a line.
While the country's mainstream parties have all hardened their stance on migration, Germany remains divided. A crisis which could push the far right further up the polls. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Germany.
Kemi Badenoch says she's not surprised people are not rushing back to support the Conservative Party following last year's election defeat. She was speaking after exclusive polling conducted by YouGov for Sky News shows her party is facing a major challenge by Nigel Farage's Reform UK, which is leading the Tories on trust, strength and clarity of purpose. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has been finding out why.
Just how much trouble are the Conservatives in? How much potential does Reform UK have? Sky News has new exclusive polling allowing us to take a deep dive. Right, start here. Back 10 years ago, when Nigel Farage led UKIP, remember that? People thought that he was just too toxic to ever become Prime Minister, that there might be a ceiling on his and UKIP support that's lower than the potential pool of Tory voters. But how has that picture changed? Now he's leading the new party, Reform UK. And there's a clever way to measure all of this, so follow me on this. This bar here is the UK electorate. Now, we asked how many people would definitely not vote for reform. And 56% said that they would definitely not. And here's the thing. That's an almost identical figure to the 55% who said they would definitely not vote Tory. Now, what does that mean? That means that the potential pool of 44% of voters could vote reform. It's almost the same as the 45% who could vote for the Tories. So it really doesn't seem from all of this that Reform UK have a ceiling any higher or lower than the Tories. Now, I want to compare and contrast a few specifics when putting the Tories side by side with Reform UK. Now, how do voters feel about the two-party brands? Well, look at this. Only 10% see Kemi Badenoch's Tories as strong. 61% view them as weak. But what about for Reform? Look at this. 31% see them as strong, more than the 27% that see them as weak. Let's do another one. Now look at this. Only 18% of voters say that they think the Conservatives have a clear sense of purpose under Kemi Badenoch, whereas 59% say they are unclear about what the Tories actually stand for. And now let's put that side by side with Reform, and 49% say there's a clear sense of purpose from Nigel Farage, Reform UK, whereas 24% say they're unclear about what that party stands for. And do voters trust either of the parties? Not very much. It's certainly a resounding no for the Conservatives. 11% say they're trustworthy, 65% untrustworthy. But when it comes to Reform UK, 19% trustworthy, 52% untrustworthy. Now, it's too early in this Parliament for parties to have much policy. We're judging and seeing voters judging them on vibe. But at the moment, almost every element of the vibe of Reform UK is more attractive to voters than Kemi Badenoch's Conservatives. Challenging times ahead for the Tories.
Well, our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh asked the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, what she thought about the poll and whether she sees it as a threat to her party.
What worries me is the fact that we just had a historic defeat last year. Conservatives lost more seats than ever before, and it's no surprise that the public aren't rushing back because they need to see that the party is under new leadership. That is what I'm offering, and we need to make sure that we rebuild trust with the public, being an effective opposition.
The polls are all in Reform's favour.
Polls are a snapshot. I remember in 2019, Conservatives were at 9% in July, and we won the election in December. So polls are a snapshot. It's not an election now. We need to make sure that when there is an election, the public see a credible and viable alternative to Labour, and that will be my party.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Their headline, Zelensky will not recognise talks with Moscow that exclude Ukraine. Or when we come back, do stay with us.